Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. I'm delighted to be joined by Steve Mason, a senior consultant here at Blackmores, who implements ISO 27001 amongst other standards. And this episode is going to be a continuation of the last episode on the ISO 27001 series when we talked about how to start planning the implementation of your information security management system. So we covered a gap analysis, what's involved with that, and also the risk assessment part, which is fundamentally important to identifying the key risks and assets and the potential controls that a business may need to put in place within their information security management system. So this episode, we're going to be focusing on the creation of the information security management system and some of the key things to consider as you're going through that process. So welcome back, Steve.
Thank you, Mel.
So I think we left off on the risk assessment.
We did, yes.
And it was fascinating how you uncovered lots of different things that businesses should be considering and different risks. And the next stage, I believe, is taking those actions.
Exactly, yes.
And creating that information security management system.
Exactly, because you need to build your management system in such a way that it's actually going to address those risks. And it's no good building something that doesn't meet those needs and the mitigations, because it'll just not meet together in the middle. I think it's important, if we're going to start building a management system, we need to have a policy in place, because we want to know really what top management's aim is for information security. So that policy really ideally should have a focus on meeting customer requirements, meeting continual improvement, have a commitment to security itself, and commitment to security in terms of confidentiality, integrity and availability. If you remember in the last podcast, I mentioned about CIA when we were doing the risk assessment. That's why it's important to have it in the policy document itself, so that it begins to link things up throughout the system.
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses think about the confidentiality part
They do,
with information
yes.
security. That's the first thing I think that you consider. But not many people think about availability or integrity. But why are those two things so important, and why does that have to be driven down from the top?
I think we often overlook the integrity and availability, mainly because we see confidentiality as being the thing that security is about. But actually there could be some situations where integrity is far more important. What do we mean by integrity? It's quite simply about accuracy of information. Now imagine if you're working in an office place, you've got perhaps 10 people in a department. They've got a shared folder that they should all be putting all their information into, but all of them start to leave the information on their desktops, so on their laptops or their PCs, so they're not actually sharing the information. Therefore the integrity, the accuracy of the information gets affected, because when the next person goes to the shared area, they're perhaps working on an out-of-date document that somebody else has updated. So that's why it's important to have that integrity in place. The other thing about integrity is making sure that information doesn't remain in your head if it needs to be shared with other people, that somehow you've got mechanisms of sharing that information out with other people. It might be through meetings, it might be through applications you have in place where things need to be recorded. And the availability is just as important. It's not just about availability of the information, but availability of systems. Have we got IT systems that are going to be continually available to actually allow us to have that information to hand? And the availability again links in with that integrity. If you're storing things on your own private laptop and not in a shared area, it's not going to be available to your colleagues.
And you could say that's the most important thing, actually,
Exactly,
because how many businesses are so dependent on data and systems?
Yeah.
I don't think there are many businesses now that could operate without that. So you could argue that the one that's kind of not seen to be as important is actually
the most important.
Absolutely critical, isn't it?
And the reason you would drive that down from top management is because if top management really take security seriously, they're going to want to make sure they're not wasting time by people having to do jobs 2 or 3 times over because the documents are not being stored in a shared area. A lot of wasted time could be so easily saved if you had it easily to hand. it's almost like a kind of lean management tool we're building in here.
Okay, great. So we begin with the information security policy statement.
Yes.
And so sometimes we get asked about, how many procedures do we need? Do we need to have procedures in place for every control? So I think in Annex A, there are about 113 controls. Do we need to have procedures in place for every single one, Steve?
Well, if you really want 113 procedures, you could do, but I would advise against
I'd rather
it.
not.
No. To be quite honest, I mean, the more procedures you build, the more you've got to maintain them. And we should always think about our management system as being 90% delivery and 10% maintenance. So what we're looking at is really going through those Annex A controls and identifying where it says anything like procedure or policy or a plan or something like that. So that's where we need our documented information. And sometimes it might mean that you see that it's access control policy. So you say, right, okay, what's access control saying within the standard? And there might be, about 10 controls that are linked to access control. Bring those all into that one policy.
Fantastic. So you're blending them all together.
Exactly.
So it makes it a lot easier to get access control if you're new to access control within an organisation.
Yes.
And so if you've got a new starter and you're doing an induction, rather than having lots of different procedures or controls, it's in one place.
Yes. I've even come across some organisations that have simplified it even further and simply had just two main documents. You've got the user security document and you've got the technical security document.
So the user one is a general document for all
acceptable
employees.
use, that's right, how to use the internet, how to use email, what the responsibilities are for backup and all that sort of thing, whether allowed to download software, all those sorts of things. Whereas the technical one is much more around the technical controls that are in the standard. And by having two manuals, it simply means you've got less to manage at the end of the day.
Yes, and I guess for the employees, they get the information on a need-to-know basis.
Exactly, yes.
So they don't need to know every single thing about 27001.
No.
They just need to know what's relevant for them to do their job.
Exactly.
If they've got a visitor, okay, so how are we dealing with that?
Yes,
Have we got to escort them? Have we got to give them a name badge? Just simple things like that
Yes.
affects everybody that might have a visitor that's coming to see them for a meeting.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, that's great. I guess that makes it a lot easier to then communicate what their requirements are and the part that they play within the business.
And it could be one of those things you bring into your induction process. So you've got a new person coming into your organisation. You can say, right, we need you to read the information security policy and understand it, ask questions if you don't understand it. And you can go away and read the acceptable use policy, which might be the sort of user's part of the controls. The other document I tend to get organisations to develop is a scoping document. There is a requirement in the standard that you must have your scope defined. Now that can be as simple as just writing out a scope, or you can actually make it do something.
Sorry, just to interrupt you there, when you say it's as simple as writing out a scope, could you give an example of what a scope would be for, I don't know, a software company might develop software?
Okay, so a scope could be as simple as we develop software to the requirements of OWASP, which is a particular type of development standard. So we develop our software to OWASP using the following pieces of information supported by XYZ departments within the organisation.
Excellent. So it's making it crystal clear
Yeah.
what you're actually certified
Exactly.
for.
Exactly.
What services you're delivering that is covered within that.
It's a
by
slight
that information security
expansion.
system.
It's a slight expansion of the scope you might have on a certificate. So you're actually sort of saying, well, we do this with the involvement of these people and perhaps with the involvement of a third party here, there and everywhere sort of thing.
So it's basically documenting what you were talking about in episode 1.
Very
that you
much
said was
so,
so
yes.
important to get that scope right.
Yes, yeah.
So the scoping document is a kind of expansion of that?
Yes, I tend to, with the scoping document, tend to say, right, okay, well, let's start with the scope from the certificate.
Yeah.
A very simple statement, and let's open that up. Let's see what that means to the organisation. So it might be then putting a bit of a description underneath as to what security means to the organisation. Then we can actually identify the locations in which we're going to be putting our management system, because it might be more than one location we're actually allowing the management system to be established in. After that, I then identify all the interested parties. Now, people always struggle. What does interested parties mean? Well, it's your stakeholders. It's Your employees are interested in what happens. The directors are interested. Your key suppliers are always interested. You might have regulatory bodies that are interested in what you do. So the thing is, identify your interested parties. What is it they want from your management system? And what can they provide to your management system? And how are you going to ensure that that's done? Once you've got that, you can identify what does CIA mean. So that CIA, remember we had in the policy document, we can expand that a little bit more to give a little bit detail as to what it all means. So it becomes less of a mystery to people, and easier to understand.
So just going back to the procedures then, within that information security management system, could you provide an example of some really useful procedures? So it might not necessarily be mandatory, but there are controls within Annex A. It could be around HR or personnel security or IT security. Could you provide an example of a procedure that you find is really helpful for an organisation?
I think often the procedures that are most useful are the user's procedures, so sort of acceptable use. We all go into our businesses with a preconceived idea of what we can do with the internet and what we can do with email. And I think it's important that you lay down some very strict rules around that. Not because you're killjoys, but simply because you're trying to protect your systems from being hacked or having viruses.
Yeah, or I guess the other factor to consider now is social media as well, isn't it?
Very much so, yes. Yeah. In fact, social media is actually playing a forefront within a lot of the policies. There's an information transfer policy that's required within the standard, and I'm encouraging people to think in that information transfer policy. How do they do information transfer on social media? How do they do information transfer on perhaps something like Skype or Zoom? Because are they using a trusted site? Think about information transfer going into things like Dropbox or Box or anywhere like that. Are they safe locations in which to put your information?
Yes, because I think years ago, one of the greatest risks was USB sticks. And taking lots of data.
I made the sign of the cross there, sorry. USB sticks.
And accidentally losing them, leaving them at another company's another company's PC with CD-ROMs, the old floppy disks. There's lots of different types of portable media, isn't there, that can contain data. But of course, it's so much easier now just to drop files into something like Dropbox, isn't it? So it's those sorts of controls that businesses now need to be not obviously aware of, but actually put policies in place.
Yeah. And sometimes with some of these places where you just deposit a bit of information so somebody else can pick it up, you've got to understand where's that information being stored. Because think about GDPR, there's requirements for you to make sure stuff is stored within the EU and the UK. And if the company you're using happens to store their information outside of the EU or the UK, you could potentially be breaking the law because you put personal information into an area that is not protected by GDPR.
Okay. Great. So there's some useful ones. And are there any mandatory requirements? I know that there will be a number of them, but are there any particular mandatory requirements that you want to just provide a bit of guidance on?
Yes, if we go back to the clauses of the standard, we spoke about the policy, the scope, and we've got then the risk assessment is mandatory. You must have a risk assessment in place. You have to have what's known as a statement of applicability. It's important that when we come out of the back of the risk assessment, we produce a statement of applicability. Now, that could simply be a list of all the controls you've selected and say why you've selected them or why you haven't selected them. But I like to actually make it something that's meaningful so that you put a bit more information in there that actually directs you through to the policies or the activities or the reports that you're producing.
Fantastic. So it's like a signposting document then.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Yes, yeah. So that's a key document. Other key documents would be around your internal audits, making sure you've got schedule, audits being done, and plus your management review, and finally your continual improvement log. So that's all the clauses. The controls are slightly different. They only become mandatory if you select the control as a control to follow. So if you haven't selected the control, don't write a policy. I have come across people that have written policies just in case. I know I haven't selected the control, but just in case I do one day, I've written a policy. That's not what it's about.
But in terms of those controls, so if there are over 100 controls in Annex A, in your experience, as a percentage, roughly how many are usually applicable?
Oh, that's, how big is a piece of string? Yeah, I would say that percentage-wise, you're probably looking at about 90%.
Pretty high then.
Yeah,
pretty high.
Yeah. It's very
Yeah.
unusual to come across organisations that have got less than that. I only ever came across one organisation that had removed 70 controls. And as a
Wow.
BSI assessor at the time, I looked at it and thought, hold on a minute, why are you removing 70 controls from information security? But when we looked into it, we realised that actually those controls didn't apply, because this was an organisation which was simply going out collecting confidential waste, bringing it back to a depot and shredding it. So they
Right,
didn't
okay.
need all the IT technical stuff that you would normally associate with 27001.
Interesting.
So it's horses for courses, really, in that respect.
Excellent. Well, I think we could talk all day about the creation
Yeah,
of
we
different
could,
policies
we
and
could.
procedures, but I think that's been really helpful to identify some of the useful ones, some of the mandatory ones, and how to go about creating them as well. So once we've done all of that, and I think that's another podcast in the making as well, going through some of those areas, because I was just going through my mind, I was thinking actually it would be great to cover off the HR controls and procedures and what HR manager might find useful to have in place for their department. But we haven't really got time to go into detail on that today. But just finally then, so once we've got those procedures and policies documented, what happens next? Who can approve them, and how do we then share them?
Right, okay. Well, I think if we're talking about approval, it's got to be, first of all, internal approval. So whenever you're writing policies and documents, they really should have an owner. And you should have some sort of process by which they can pass through a person or a committee to be approved and agreed that they're appropriate for the organisation. But don't run away with the idea you've got to review and approve them every year. Always review and approve documents based on their risk to the organisation. So if it's a document that's of very low risk, perhaps do it every 3 years.
That's a really good point actually, Steve, because sometimes when I go into an organisation and have a look at a management system, if it's a pretty old system, I have come across cases where each individual page has been signed, actually manually signed, and it has a creator, an issuer, an approver, a final approver, and they've all got signatures, and I'm just thinking, crikey, haven't they got
And they've got
a better way to spend their time
And that's what I'm saying.
So you don't need any of that now, do you? It's all related to the level of risk. And actually you don't need those physical signatures anyway, because if you've got a system like SharePoint or even
it'd be clear on there. Yes,
exactly, have a simple way of controlling documents.
And that's what I meant by that sort of 10% maintenance, 90% delivery. You could so easily turn over into 90% maintenance and 10% delivery.
You could if you don't do it the right way.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
good point.
So make sure you've got the approvals in place. But then always make sure you've got a good auditing process in place, so that those policies and procedures may be good. Are they really what you do? So make sure you get a trained auditor in, either from outside or within your own company, to come in, look at those policies and procedures, understand the standard, and assess what you're doing in reality. And does it meet those requirements?
Yes, we'll come on to auditing
I know that's
in
going to
the
be
next
another subject.
episode, in episode 3 actually.
Yeah.
So don't just create procedures that you think are utopia and
Yeah,
they're
that's
up there
right.
and
Yeah,
they look
yeah.
amazing. If they're not actually going to work in real life, they've got to work for your company's culture and the number of employees that you've got. It's all got to be realistic, hasn't it? To actually add value and reduce risk to your business.
Very much so. Yeah.
Excellent. So how can employees get access to it then, once that's been created?
Ideally, you should have perhaps somewhere like an intranet built, or perhaps into SharePoint, any shared area where people can access those documents. But make them easy to find. Don't hide them away somewhere that people are scratching their head. One thing I do recommend is get people to create shortcuts on their desktops so that they know where their policies and procedures are. Click on it, it takes them straight to it. And then they can look at easy access files that are very clear as to what they hold within those files. The minute you make it difficult for people to find policies and procedures is the minute they don't start reading them. They find it too difficult, they switch off. I've got more better things to do, I'll go and do my job. Then you've lost the battle.